Good afternoon and welcome to AP4D's webinar, Philanthropy and International Development. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Heather Rathel and I'm one of the Senior Policy Analysts here at AP4D. I'm joining you from the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people here in Canberra, and I pay my respects to their leaders past, present and emerging, and I extend that respect to any First Nations or Indigenous people joining us here today. Well, I've been really delighted with the number of people who have signed up to hear about this really fascinating topic. I think we have just ticked over about 240 registrations, which is a really wonderful turnout for what promises to be an insightful and interesting discussion. I know some of you will be opting to watch the recording at a later date rather than joining us live, but however you're joining us, I extend a really warm welcome on behalf of the whole AP4D team. It's great to have you here with us. Now, this webinar is being live captioned, so if that's something that's of use to you, you can click the captioning button in the meeting controls toolbar. It's the one that has CC on it. Here at AP4D, we're all about collaborating and connecting different groups of people working on interesting international policy issues. And given the current global development landscape, I think you'll all agree it feels really timely to be talking about the role of philanthropy and international development. With aid budgets being cut across the globe, there's definitely new impetus for mobilising development finance from all sources. Now, while philanthropy alone is not going to be a silver bullet, it can certainly play a catalytic role in sustainable development. To help us unpack this a little bit more, we have a wonderful lineup of speakers joining us today. To set the scene on the global philanthropy landscape, we'll be hearing from the Director of the OECD Centre on Philanthropy, Ragnheiður. I've probably butchered that. I have been practicing. I apologise to any native Icelandic speakers on the call. We will then be hearing from a panel of experts who each bring a different perspective to the intersection of philanthropy and international development. We'll be hearing about philanthropy in Australia, in the Pacific, and in Asia, as well as diaspora philanthropy and the role of corporate foundations. We are hoping we do have a packed lineup, but we do have a whole hour together. So I'm hoping at the end we will have time for some audience Q&A. So if you have questions to any of the panelists, or you'd like to make some comments or reactions as you hear different people speak, please feel free to put that in the Q&A function, and I encourage you to do that as the questions occur to you. Don't wait till the end because you might run out of time. But without further ado, let's get into it, and we're going to start with a recorded message from Ragnheiður from the OECD Centre for Philanthropy.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a true pleasure to join you on behalf of the OECD Development Centre to discuss the role philanthropy plays in development. Many thanks to the Asia-Pacific Development, Diplomacy and Defence Dialogue for convening this important discussion. Conversations like this are essential. The development landscape is shifting rapidly, and the way we work together must evolve with it, and the challenges are clear. In 2024, the OECD recorded a 9% drop in official development assistance, ODA. This year, for the first time since 1995, the four largest ODA providers, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, and the United States, all reduced their aid budgets simultaneously. However, the picture is not the same everywhere. In Asia, for instance, while aid is expected to decline across South and Central Asia, it is set to rise in East Asia, driven largely by major donors such as Japan. These regional variations underscore the reality. Public aid alone cannot meet today's global challenges. New partnerships and sources of finance are essential. At the Development Center, this inclusive approach defines our work. We bring together OECD and non-OECD countries, along with foundations, civil society, and the private sector, to exchange ideas and act collectively. Two key platforms support this effort: the Center on Philanthropy, which collects and maps data on foundations, and the network of foundations working for development, NetForward, which transforms that knowledge into partnerships and action. Data from the Center on Philanthropy shows that private philanthropy represents a growing source of development finance. Preliminary findings from the third edition of the OECD COP report on private philanthropy for development that covers 370 foundations reveal that between 2020 and 2023, foundations contributed an impressive $66 billion to development efforts. Of this amount, 52 billion came from cross-border philanthropic disbursements and 14 billion from domestic foundations. Notably, Asia received the largest share of philanthropic funding, $18.6 billion in total. While these figures may seem impressive, philanthropic contributions represented only 10% of total ODA during the period 2020 to 2023. So no, philanthropy is not the panacea, as a recent blog from AIDN highlighted, and cannot replace aid. But philanthropy's clear role in development goes well beyond money and lies in its ability to act as a catalyst. Philanthropic organizations can take risks, they can pilot new ideas and mobilize others to invest in areas that are often overlooked. Since 2012, NetForward has been working tirelessly to position philanthropy as a meaningful partner for global development with two clearly defined goals. First, to ensure that more philanthropic resources, both cross-border and domestic, are directed toward development. And second, to make sure that these resources are used effectively by harnessing philanthropy's unique strengths and agility, and in collaboration with other sources of finance. As highlighted in the Seville Compromise, addressing growing fragmentation and lack of coordination is essential to respond to increasing transaction costs and uphold long-standing effectiveness principles. End of quote. At the Finance for Development conference in Seville this year, FFD4, foundations signed the OECD NetForward statement on philanthropy's strategic support to the Financing for Development agenda and beyond. The statement commits foundations to deepen collaboration with donors and development finance institutions, to scale locally led solutions, attract private investment through public-private philanthropy partnerships, and support policy innovation aligned with national priorities while strengthening the capacities of local actors. We are greatly encouraged to see this important conversation on philanthropy and international development taking place. These exchanges are vital to ensuring that every actor can contribute their strengths towards a shared, whole-of-nation approach. At the OECD Development Centre, we look forward to deepening our collaboration with Australian foundations and partners, and to scaling up our engagement to further amplify the impact of philanthropy for sustainable and inclusive development. As we look ahead, the message is clear. No single actor can deliver sustainable and inclusive development alone. Progress depends on the ability to connect resources, knowledge, and innovation across all sectors. Together, by combining the strength of all actors, public, private, and philanthropic, we can deliver on our shared promise to create more equitable, resilient, and sustainable societies. Thank you once again to the Asia-Pacific Development Diplomacy and Defense Dialogue for hosting this exchange, and to all of you for your continued commitment to advancing global development through collaboration and shared purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Ragnar. I think you'll all agree that that really does a wonderful job of setting the scene for today's discussion and paints a picture of the global philanthropy landscape and how it interacts with international development. We'll now turn, I think in her comments, Ragnar mentioned a blog piece, which if you're interested in checking out, I believe Tom has popped the link in the chat. So do pop over to the AIDEN website and have a look at that piece. But let's turn now to our expert panel. I'm thrilled to introduce to you a wonderful lineup of speakers. We've got Julie Rosenberg, Executive Director of the Australian International Development Network, AIDEN. We've got Anita Toy, Executive Director from Myriad Australia. Taholo Kami, who is the CEO of Kami Pacifica, and Taholo is joining us from PNG today. So thank you, Taholo, for making that extra effort. We have Naina Sabawal-Batra, CEO of AVPN. Naina is also joining from overseas and has had to hop up super early to be with us today. It's really wonderful to have you with us, Naina. And last but certainly not least, we have Anna Marsden, who's the Managing Director of the Great Barrier Reef Foundation. So a real cross-section of wonderful experts to talk more about philanthropy and international development. Well, we've just heard from Ragnar on the global philanthropy ecosystem, but let's move our focus a bit closer to home. Julie, you're Executive Director of the Australian International Development Network. Can you tell us a little bit about Australia's philanthropic landscape and examples of international giving and how the work of AIDEN works to promote that philanthropic giving to international initiatives?
Yes, I can. Well, just reversing those 2 points, actually, AIDEN fell into a gap, I feel, in the market. It was set up to actually stem the tide of decreasing interest from Australians in international giving. And that happened around about 2014. No one's still sure why or, what caused it, what led it, whether it was government-led or donor-led, but there was definitely a drop. So AIDEN stepped into that gap to actually build a campaign to raise awareness, build connections, with the bottom line of more and better giving and investing from Australians to international causes. So it was sort of identified at a Philanthropy Australia conference by John McLeod, who does all the figures in Australia for JB Weir, yelling, the sky's falling, what's happening with international development. And so AIDEN has been working since then on all sorts of interventions to actually just bring the case, the compelling case for global giving, and make it as accessible to Australian donors and investors as we can. And I mean, I think the estimate is that 10% of giving goes internationally from Australia. We're still not completely sure on the figures. Loads of people have spent time trying to do it, but it's difficult. But we do it. AIDEN does it using a lot of interventions, philanthropods, newsletters, webinars, and now we've started throwing people on the bus and taking them to actually meet local leaders. So yeah, AIDEN is just fallen into that gap that we identified, that it was decreasing, and we set about to turn that around. So I hope that answers those questions. I can go into more detail, but there's a lot of us on here with a lot of answers and thoughts and lenses.
No, thank you, Julia. I appreciate that. I guess we've got time for everyone. So if there was anything else you wanted to say about Australia's landscape, philanthropic landscape, please feel free to do so.
Well, I think the biggest issue is that Australians are not very interested in international giving and causes. They are very insular, and we saw that during COVID. We all thought we could pull up the walls and COVID would stay on the other side. As a nation, we love emergencies, but we're not naturally generous either. It's not been part of the culture. I have my own theories around that. I think countries develop cultures depending on how they're established, and we've always been government-led. Well, since the colonisation anyway. And then that's an interesting point as well, because if you talk to First Nations people, they don't really understand philanthropy. It's a part of just looking after the people around your country and care for the benefit of all, which I guess should be the definition of philanthropy. But in Australia, the interest has not been international. There's been a fear. We've also had, along with loads of other governments around the world, I mean, most governments want their taxpayers to use their money here to support causes in their own country. So up until the Hunger Project case, there are also a huge number of hurdles. Now we have people like, you know, Anita Toy sitting here with Myriad, Partners for Equity. There are a number, The Life You Can Save, a number of platforms that are helping Australians to break down the hurdles and actually give internationally. But there's a piece, I think, beforehand, which is actually making the compelling case. Why is it relevant to Australians? That tyranny of distance has, you know, it's a two-edged sword. But that's probably all I would say on my thoughts on it at this point.
Thanks, Julie. It's wonderful to hear your insights and perspectives. On that, we might now move to Anita. We certainly in Australia have many really vibrant and wonderful diaspora communities, and these communities are a unique group of givers, often very generous givers, but they might not be what immediately springs to mind when we think of philanthropists. As Managing Director of Myriad, Anita, what do you see as some of the benefits of diaspora philanthropy, and how can we maximise this untapped potential?
Yeah, thanks, Heather. I think Australia's multicultural diversity is such a core component of who we are as a nation, and it's evolving quite rapidly. Almost half of Australians now, and that's almost 10 million people, have at least one parent that's born overseas. So this shifting demographic of the first and second generation migrants are building their own wealth and financial stability, and that's reshaping how Australians give, invest in communities at home here, but also abroad. So every year there's billions of dollars flowing out of Australia, shaping economies thousands of kilometres away. So to really put that in perspective, in 2024 alone, the diaspora community in Australia sent over $38 billion in remittance overseas. So that's money moving directly to families overseas, strengthening the bonds and making a real difference to the livelihood of loved ones. So what's really striking about that figure is that it's more than double our national giving, our national charitable giving, and almost 10 times the size of Australia's foreign aid budget. So to me, that points to a massive and largely untapped opportunity for philanthropy. If we could even a small portion of that flow be channeled towards community development or structured giving, the impact could be extraordinary. So the magic question is, how do we unlock, unleash, or really sort of tap into this potential? And I think that at the heart of it, giving's all about connection, right? And shared responsibility. And the diaspora community in Australia are a powerful force in cross-border philanthropy because their giving is often driven by their deep personal connections, the cultural and emotional ties to the countries that they are from or where their family are still residing. So to really harness this potential, I think what we really need to do there are three key elements that we need in the philanthropic ecosystem to really unlock its potential. And I think the first is really technology. Digital platforms today are really going to revolutionize the way people give. They connect communities across borders. They also enable crowdfunding campaigns, mobilize collective giving movements, and really making that process of giving easier and more seamless. The second is, we really need to celebrate diversity and collaboration. And when we celebrate the diversity within diaspora communities, we bring networks together. We can identify shared priorities, align values, and achieve a much more greater collective impact. And I think that the third is to really have a trust-based infrastructure. And that means having transparent, reliable systems that address donor skepticism and to really build confidence, because trust is key to giving. So once people know that giving is safe and transparent, but also tax deductible, they're often much more likely to give. For us here at Myriad Australia, we're really deeply committed to serving the diaspora community, and we're strategically working to unlock its potential. And you know, in the next few months, we're really excited to sort of share our findings with the sector.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anita. It's really interesting to hear that point of view. Can you talk a little bit about how the things that Myriad does to make that cross-border giving easier and more effective?
Yeah, I guess that at Myriad, our mission is really simple, and that's to make cross-border giving from Australia simple, safe, tax effective, so donors in Australia can support high-impact charities anywhere in the world with confidence. And we're really focused on building that trusted, transparent, and compliant pathway for international philanthropy so generosity can flow seamlessly across borders. Julie touched on this slightly earlier. You know, Australia is still relatively new to international philanthropy, and there are many unknowns for those who are unfamiliar with it. There's regulatory hurdles, there's currency challenges and due diligence requirements that can make it hard to navigate. So that's where sort of Myriad sort of steps in. We make it easier for donors and overseas partners to sort of connect with each other. There's a number of ways that we do this, and the first way is through our Friends Fund, which is also known as auspicing or fiscal sponsorship that others might be familiar with. And this allows overseas nonprofits to receive tax-deductible donations from Australians without having the need to legally register as an entity here. So essentially, we bring them under our DGR1 umbrella so they can receive donations from Australian supporters. We also offer donor advised funds or grants, and this is a service for donors where Myriad takes care of all of the grant administration and management, so the donor can just really experience joy in giving, and Myriad Australia takes care of the rest. And lastly, we are part of a global Myriad Alliance network, which now has expanded to 9 members around the world. And we partner with trusted local experts to move funds compliantly, overcome those cultural hurdles, navigate different regulatory systems to ensure that support reaches the communities that really need it the most. So I think, you know, Heather, at a time when aid and government budgets are shrinking, our mission is to really simplify cross-border giving and inspire people to invest in local capacities and make it easier.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Anita. And certainly an aspect of my work that I've really enjoyed in the last few months has been understanding that role that diaspora communities can play, both through philanthropy, but also through remittances. So thank you for being with us here today. I see some people are starting to get questions in. I encourage, if you do have questions for Anita, for Julie, or for any of our panelists, do take an opportunity to pop those in, and we will attempt to get to them at the end of the event. If we're looking a little bit further afield now, the Pacific Island region is definitely a primary focus of Australia's official development program, but it can be overlooked by international and Australian philanthropy. The Pacific region, as I understand it, has been doing some things to position itself to attract more philanthropic funding through the establishment of Pacific-led funding mechanisms for pooled funds, things like that. With us today is Taholo from Kami Pacifica, and I know this is an area that you have done some work in, Taholo. Can you talk about this work and perhaps what you see as some of the next steps for enabling philanthropic funds to flow into the Pacific?
Okay, you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. And again, greetings from Papua New Guinea. I'm from Tonga, live in Fiji, and remittances are a big part of the Pacific in terms of not just shoring up our economy, but building infrastructure in our communities. So good to hear your presentation, Anita. I've been working with several philanthropies, especially around climate and oceans over the years. More recently, I think the inference that that there is this attempt to sort of create more coordination around what philanthropy is doing in the Pacific. The Pacific Community, which is an intergovernmental organization, has worked with the Bezos Earth Fund in an attempt to manage $100 million of assistance to several countries. There are advantages and disadvantages to this approach because the strength of philanthropic giving is often the freedom and the flexibility to deal with issues that normal aid and government-led processes don't often cover. And so when you ask a government, intergovernmental organization to say, oh, we can help coordinate according to what governments want, it can often be disempower the ability, the philanthropies and the ability to do what governments don't do. And that's where some of the power of the independence and the flexibility of philanthropy has been. Here in the Pacific, it's relatively new to get long-term engagements. In issues like oceans, especially oceans and community engagements, the US has had some philanthropies that have been in for quite a while. For example, the PACA Foundation, MacArthur, and some of the other US organizations have come in, and some of them have made a difference by doing the long-term engagement, doing appropriate funding at the right time for communities, and a period of 10 years, for instance. Often the danger is when they decide that they've got other priorities, they decide we want to do big stuff instead of the kind of things we're doing in Pacific Island communities. More recently, we've had a group of other partners who've come in stronger from the US again. And I'm saying more the US in our experience. And I think some of it has been the response to the geopolitics and the encouragement to sort of look at the Pacific if you can. And so we've had a few foundations that have come out. And I find that I work with 3 or 4 of these, some directly, some indirectly, that there is an informal coordination, that they're talking to each other, always talking to each other about what are you doing in these countries? Are there things we can do together? And I think that kind of coordination is positive and something that we need to see more of. I'm here in Papua New Guinea, and we've been able to take certain issues. We met the Prime Minister this morning. And even though it's come in with very smaller but targeted investments in creating marine protected areas, we're able to help government carry things all the way up to the top of the political agenda. And these are things that can be done in a shorter time than some of the bigger governmental type investments from the aid sector. And so I think one of the things is recognizing the strength that philanthropy brings to the development picture in terms of flexibility, in terms of building bridges, sometimes between normal or formal investors in development investment. And just sometimes they just respond quickly to great ideas. And I find that positive. I'll stop there. There might be further questions down the line. Thank you.
Thank you, Taholo. And I think that's a really important point, is that the comparative strengths of different sources of funding. So we heard there that philanthropy can respond often in agile ways and go to places where perhaps governments are not active, or there might be reasons why governments are reluctant to get involved. I was really interested in what you were saying about the local oceans and the local communities, and we are going to hear from Anna a little bit later in the panel. But it strikes me that despite the relative small populations in the Pacific, there's a chance for philanthropy to achieve really outsized impact, particularly in areas around, say, biodiversity and other environmental challenges. Can you just briefly talk a little bit maybe about that potential impact?
Switching screens, huh? Yeah, definitely. So, things like, for example, there's been a really big interest in national ocean planning.
Mm-hmm.
We're helping countries look at the whole EEZ and what do we do with that ocean use. Governments have always wanted to do better planning, but the partners have been very slow on this one. And so right now, it's a lot of it has been funded by philanthropists in many of our countries, helping them get across the line. And by taking on that engagement in the initial 5 years, now you're finding the traditional donors are jumping on board as well. And it's becoming crowded space, but important space. And if it wasn't for philanthropy putting their hands up and saying, yeah, we'll put $1 million towards getting that done, or we'll put some people into government to do the work, help them have the capacity to do the work, things wouldn't be moving so fast. And it's happened on the ground with forests. We're seeing this with the oceans as well. There's some interest coming from Australia more recently, and of course, most of you probably understand why, in the climate space. And I think that's partly the build up to COP31 and philanthropies. We're getting organizations we haven't seen in a while popping in, and we know they're coming through Canberra. But that's the kind of interest that's happening, asking questions like, what would you like to do with climate? Where can we help? And I find all of this is useful because it fills a gap, and then later on, traditional donors start to see it's important, especially when governments get excited.
Yeah, and I guess that speaks to another advantage of philanthropic funding, is that it can sometimes lead the way. And as you say, then the traditional donors that take a bit longer can come on board at a later date. But thank you. That's really interesting to hear about the work that's being done there. And I'm sure it's an area that, as you say, in the lead up to COP31, we'll see more interest. But let's hope that it's a prolonged interest and continues for many years to come. Naina, you're the CEO of AVPN, which is the largest network of social investors in Asia, and you kind of build ecosystems that move capital towards impact. I'd really like to understand that a little bit more. So can you talk about the work of AVPN and what it means to be an ecosystem builder?
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for having us. So, when I joined AVPN in 2013, we were not AVPN. We were known more by our full form, which is the Asian Venture Philanthropy Network. And much of our work at that point revolved around explaining what venture philanthropy is and to show how different stakeholders can be part of the same ecosystem. And back then, you had a few foundations, you had some corporates and governments in particular who all worked in silos, although they were working on similar challenges. I think what has happened in Asia, unlike Europe and the United States, is that Asia never really had a history of, institutions that were already pre-established. And when we had AVPN, which was, a regional network, it was the first of its kind that actually even connected different countries. So you've had diaspora remitting money back through various mechanisms, whether it's Western Union, whether it's looking at traditional remittance systems, but you've never really had strong institutions of philanthropy and or even government really looking at how do you promote philanthropy on a national scale, much less cross-border giving in Asia, which has not really been there historically. So a lot of what AVPN has done is really look at how do you connect different types of organization on channeling resources and helping them actually collaborate with each other towards impact. And that's why I think an ecosystem builder like AVPN is really needed in a region like Asia. We are, I think when the lady from OECD was speaking, and I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce her name, you did a great job. What she said is absolutely right, that while, we look at ODA shrinking, the amount of philanthropy, at least in Asia, is rising. It's growing. And part of the reason is the rising wealth in Asia. It is that one part of the world where we are seeing the most amount of billionaires come into being, literally every day. We are also seeing countries move from being lesser developed to being middle income countries. And, Asian countries have been the few countries that have moved from net recipients of aid to actually becoming donors of aid. So this is why, in a region like Asia, it is very, very important that we have ecosystem builders that actually bring different groups together, because while we see wealth growing, while we see capital growing, you're really looking at also a region of the world where we have the most number of climate disasters. We have gender gaps that continue to widen and are projected to take more than 120 years to achieve full gender parity. You're already looking at medical inflation in Asia, which is forecasted to outpace the global average in 2025 already, and straining already stretched health systems. Nearly 1 in 7 young people face unemployment. So these aren't just statistics, they are urgent calls to action. They demand more than conversation, and they require collective action. And that's where, we need to see ecosystem builders like us that actually use collaborative means, use opportunities to bring different kinds of philanthropic giving together. And if I can just take one moment, I wanted to just share one example. So, for example, 2 years ago, we started something called the Faith and Giving Initiative, which is designed to bring in more faith-led funders or organizations that have a values-based giving into the broader sort of impact ecosystem. We recognize that Asia Pacific is home to the majority of the world's religious populations, and more than $5 trillion actually go through faith-based assets. And, this is something which is really important, because most times faith-aligned givers, values-based givers are not really brought into the philanthropic ecosystem. And by creating a neutral, inclusive space for this dialogue, we are hoping to provide a platform for faith-driven, for secular actors to work towards shared goals like poverty alleviation, like climate action, like nutrition, which really, I think, is an example of what being an ecosystem builder truly means, and by connecting unlikely partners. A couple of the panelists have spoken about the challenges around climate change and how philanthropic giving doesn't really support climate change. That's where also an ecosystem builder like AVPN comes together, because what we try to do is connect different types of capital, from investment capital to philanthropic capital, to look at addressing climate change. Again, it was spoken earlier that philanthropic giving alone is not going to do it. It's in the billions of dollars. We talk about development aid in the trillions of dollars. The gap is in the trillions of dollars. So we need to connect philanthropic giving to capital markets, to impact investing, in order to really create a seamless kind of platform that will bring different people together. And that's what AVPN tries to do.
Thank you, Nina. I think on your website you describe it as enabling collaboration to increase the impact and flow of capital towards closing the SDG gaps. I think that's a beautiful summation of the incredible work that you do. Just really briefly, because I want to make sure that we have time to hear from Anna as well, are there lessons from AVPN's experience that could perhaps be applied to other areas such as the Pacific where these ecosystems are still quite undeveloped?
Absolutely. I think, what Taholo said about, individual organizations getting excited when government decides to participate. I think that's something that is, we can really, really look at how do we leverage that. In most of Asia, Australia maybe being an exception, in most of Asia, giving is done with government, unlike in the West, where private philanthropy plays a completely separate role. In Asia, we see for most countries, philanthropists as well as corporate giving likes to work with government because that is when they can see scale happen. They don't like to replace government. Again, part of the reason being that most of the money is first generation and it comes from business. And business works closely with government in order to, get its goals achieved. So that is something that I think we can really look at seeing is if we get governments more involved. And you can look at, for instance, in India, the companies bill that the government passed, which requires corporates above a certain size to give 2% of their surplus towards social goals. It has been huge in unlocking billions of dollars in terms of social giving. Now, that is because government took an active step. This is something that we are finding now, government by government, that is actually looking to do to tap into both corporate giving as well as private philanthropic giving. And that is something I think we will see, which will really harness how philanthropists give in Asia and actually how they collaborate not just with each other, but also with government.
Thank you, Nina. It's really interesting to hear about that work and to hear your insights and perspectives. We turn now to our final panelist, Anna Marsden, who's Managing Director of the Great Barrier Reef Foundation. Thank you, Anna. It's so lovely to have you join us today. And part of the reason that we included you in the panel was I thought that the GBRF kind of provides a wonderful example of bringing together much of what's been discussed today. So, for example, through the Unlocking Blue Pacific Prosperity Initiative, you've partnered with regional organisations, local communities, civil society and corporate foundations. Can you speak a bit about how you bring together partners and investment for impact?
Thanks, Heather. And I should just confirm that the UBPP is the initiative that Taholo spoke about, which was the Bezos Earth Fund, of which we are a partner of, and a big vinaka to Taholo because he's one of our key advisors, and we wouldn't be doing what we're doing with the confidence in the Pacific if we didn't have him in our corner telling us what to do and making sure that we're doing it at the right pace. I think for us, I mean, our name sort of describes what we do. We serve the Great Barrier Reef principally, but it's quite interesting with some of the dialogue that's been speaking about philanthropy leading and driving change. So it was about 3 or 4 years ago that in Australia, our corporate partners, but overseas, we have a USA affiliate and a 501(c)(3), our US donor family were asking us, where next? We're building great solutions for Australia's coral reefs, but where are you going to spread these next? And it was actually a distinct driver from our donor community, our supporters, to consider our neighbours next door at Pacific. I mean, the Pacific is home to 27% of the world's coral reefs, and many of them are still highly resilient. So if you're going to focus your energy on stopping an extinction event, you're going to go to the stronghold, which is in the Pacific. And it was quite interesting for us because as we started to lean into Pacific and see where we could make a great impact, we certainly had some great advisors, Taholo being one of them, but what we were finding was a lot of philanthropists had come in and funders had come in before, almost parachute funding. They had defined what they thought the problem and solution was, they funded it to a degree, and when they thought job done, they moved on to the next one. And there were a lot of remnants of that kind of giving. Similarly, the Pacific leaders and the coordinating groups, they knew exactly what needed to be done, and they were getting super organised, and they were sort of, I could feel sick and tired of organisations like us showing up saying, we have this and we want to do this, rather than saying, where can we invest and make the greatest impact? And so it was those I guess, two efforts, the predecessor and then just the clear priorities, particularly through the 2030 Pacific Coral Reef Action Plan, that showed that the foundation could play a really critical role in funding gaps. And we do it in two areas. We play a short game. There are amazing groups out there, small NGOs and community groups who just need funding to keep doing what they're doing. And that short-term small grants just allows them to keep working, as Taholo says, as other bigger players get organised and governments and things all catch up. But then there is this idea about how do we help everybody get off that short-term funding wheel. So the program that we've got under the UBPP, which is called Resilient Reefs Pacifica, has these hubs, these Resilient Reefs hubs, where we fund a whole lot of small players across the Pacific to help them just keep doing what they're doing and build their practice. And then we have adjacent to that is an accelerator model where organisations and groups that are looking for and have long sustained strategic goals, we're helping them build a larger funding case and helping, I guess, strive to get funders to crowd in around those things. So we're trying to solve immediate gaps. We're also trying to solve long-term funding gaps. So we're funding to solve funding with an understanding that there are so many other great players already doing big, shiny things, but we saw these critical gaps. And I think what keeps us very honest in this work is that we've shown up very clearly that we are here to serve the Pacific leaders and those on the front line of these amazing vulnerable ecosystems. And the role of the advisory really does tell us where to go, what to do. And we've been very fortunate that the funders behind us love that model. And what we're hoping is that if we can be smart about the case studies and the impact measures and really be able to have some phenomenal stories of uplift and broader impact, then this could be a new way to actually fund and support, because it's very empowering. I mean, I'm not sure whether Taholo would agree with me, but it is a pilot way of sharing philanthropy. It's a really interesting way for Australia to show neighbourly love and sort of embrace its remit in this region as well. So we're excited to continue. The program's only been going for 2 years, so we're excited to sort of see where it goes from here.
It sounds like a really worthwhile, exciting program and something that's great to be a part of. Just picking up on a couple of points there, Anna. One was around this idea of the parachute funding and people like philanthropic organisations coming in with an idea of what they want to do. I notice on your website and a lot of the literature that GBRF puts out really does recognise the knowledge and expertise and influence of First Nations Australians, but also of the Pacific people. Can you kind of explain a bit how that influences your work? And what would you say, in a brief way, what would you say to Australian philanthropic organisations that want to come into the Pacific?
Of course, I'll give you the heavy-hitting fact that changed the way that we work with traditional owners, First Nations communities and local communities, and that is that Indigenous peoples make up 5% of the global population, but they hold in their stewardship, in their guardianship, 85% of the remaining biodiversity on Earth. So anybody who is not placing First Nations frontline communities at the centre of their solution in environment, you're missing the point. Yeah. So that was a powerful statistic for us. So we invite and place, and often we're joining their journey and their table. They are at the centre of the solution, and we have spoken to big science organisations who are developing amazing gold-plated solutions that unless that can be used by the front line, we don't want it. And it's been such a freeing, powerful way to turn up and show. And I guess in the end, this is all driven for impact. This is how we will get impact in our lifetime. So some of those truths have been very powerful for us as a culture inside our organisation, but also to show up in communities and say, we will keep our promises to you, but this is our guiding principle.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And I would like just to invite you, Taholo, if you had any additional comments to make on those points that Anna raised, I invite you to share with us now.
Yeah, thank you. And totally agree with Anna in terms of the Pacific. And I just want to correct the thought that philanthropists not with the correct Anna, but just that's come up, that we get excited about governments. The reason that some of us are advising philanthropy is the whole issue of getting it right with Pacific governments and getting it right with Pacific communities. And yes, we've seen some just come in with an agenda. They want to deal with a certain sector, not deal with government. And often the shortcuts don't work over time. And so it's often the role that we play is pulling back our partners and saying, actually, you need to do this properly. And so the partners that we work with, it's always a discussion with government first. Yeah, it's different for what I'm saying about the coordination to be only led by government, because I think there's enough, there's a role that government plays, but there's also a place for innovation and ideas. And that often comes from other sources as well.
Thank you. Wonderful. Wonderful to hear those remarks. And I think that statistic that Anna spoke is something that we'll all take away from this webinar, along with lots of other wonderful insights and perspectives. I did promise an audience Q&A, and I know that you have been putting your questions in. Some of them have been answered in writing, and thanks to the panelists who've been responding to questions as they come through. We've only got about 7 minutes left. So this one question's come through, which I think is really fabulous. And so I'm just going to ask each of the panelists, keep your comments to maybe about a minute, given we've only got 7 minutes left. But Siv Hong Lim asks, can you share a quick snapshot of philanthropic giving, of the philanthropic giving picture, comparing 5 years ago to where you think we'll be in 5 years' time? And we might start with you, Nina.
Sure, Heather. So I think if I look at sort of an Asian snapshot, I think philanthropy has increased substantially from 5 years ago. I feel even the statistics show that philanthropy has grown significantly. Where it's going to be 5 years down the line, I certainly hope that we will move away from more traditional types of funding, where we've done a lot of brick and mortar funding in terms of schools, scholarships, looking at hospitals, to really funding things like climate change, really looking at skilling, looking at where the AI divide is going to take the rest of Asia, and how do we actually address that in an ethical and responsible manner. That's where I hope we will take the funding. I also hope we are going to expand it from mere philanthropic giving to really looking at at the capital markets, at someone's portfolio as a whole, because philanthropy, even if you are the most generous person, is usually no more than 5% of your wallet. So what is it that you do with the other 95%, I think is also really important if we are really looking at the state of our planet and of the people who inhabit it. So that's what I will say.
Thanks, Nina. Let's go to you, Anita, for a quick answer.
Thanks. I think that Australia has an incredible opportunity to make a difference beyond our borders. And I think, we're not immune to the conflicts, disasters and crises that's happening right across the world. In 5 years' time, I'd like to see cross-border giving normalised in Australia, regulations offering more freedom and donations leaving the country, not just limited to humanitarian efforts or poverty alleviation, but as Nina mentioned, redirecting these funds towards climate change, resilience. I think there is a huge urgency, particularly in our neighbourhood in Asia Pacific. And one more thing, Julie mentioned at the start of the call, it's about 10 cents of every dollar at the moment that's going internationally. In 5 years' time, let's hope that's doubled or even tripled. That's the aspiration. We're doing a lot of hard work now to build the capacity of Australian donors, to establish these ecosystems that the Myriad Alliance is bringing through Myriad Australia, and learning from AVPN, having those conversations, normalising giving. So I think that, look, the aspiration is high. I think that Australia can get there. Let's just, put our foot on the pedal.
Wonderful. I like that, foot on the pedal. Over to you, Julie.
Look, I would echo all of those sentiments. Philanthropy Australia is working really hard with the government to double philanthropic giving in Australia by 2030. There are a lot of actors in there doing that. I think the interventions that Nain has referred to, about 2% of corporates having to hand it to social good, would make all the difference. Our corporates are so slow to engage, and a lot of it is because they don't know where to start, and having a requirement that 90% of your PAF was invested in impact solutions would flip the script. So, but all working together, this idea of collaborating. But again, that comes to, you know, who's going to fund the glue in these ecosystems. The Leadership Summit was all about that. The ecosystem and building the capacity, and everybody said that, to actually know who to work with, how not to do any damage, but to actually step up that trust and confidence in all of us to come together. And I agree, there's a huge opportunity, but there are some big interventions that could take place that would really light a fire.
Thank you, Julie. Quickly to you, Taholo, then we'll finish with you, Anna.
You know, I'm looking out my window here in Port Moresby, and when you look at, I always see Moresby as the capital of extraction, and there's a lot being taken out of the Pacific into Australia and the developed countries. We're not seeing private sector put the money back and reinvest. We've got health systems that don't work. While we're fighting climate and resilience, just the basic services are not happening across the Pacific. And I'd like to see those relationships fixed. It doesn't determine on a political decision to help our Pacific, that there's greater integration right across the Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, that sees everybody benefit from this. And what that means in terms of a shift in maybe from philanthropy to more useful investment, and investment that makes a real difference.
Thank you, Taholo. And we'll finish with you, Anna.
I would echo what everyone says. I think if we look 5 years ago, we would see spot funding and very niche funding, sometimes for, you know, people's personal egos. Now you're seeing more strategic investment, more focusing on impact. But I think in some ways what the role of philanthropy right now is, we're making the water warm. We're getting it right for this all in, for the corporates, for governments. So this idea that the future, there'll be collaborative blended funding models, and they're not 2 years, 3 years, they're always on. I think that's got to be the vision, and then we can all go off and do something else.
All our incredible panelists, I think you'll all agree that's been a wonderful discussion, and hopefully just the first step in a longer ongoing discussion about the role of philanthropy and international development. If you enjoyed today, come and like us on our social medias, sign up for the AP4D newsletter so you don't miss future events, and a recording of this will be uploaded to our YouTube channel in the next day or two. So if you want to share the link, or you've missed some of it and want to go back, please feel free to do that. We've just clicked over to 3 o'clock. So again, thank you so much to our wonderful speakers. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you today. And thank you to the rest of the AP4D team, particularly to Program Manager Tom, who makes this all happen in the background, make it all seem seamless. But thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.